How's it going, everybody? Here to give my review of Straight Shooter by Stephen A. Smith, autographed edition, actually. So I pull that up for y'all. Right in there. I was very excited when Stephen A. announced this book back in October, I believe. I've been watching First Take for a long time, since about 2011, around the time the Tebow craze was going on, and it introduced me to Skip Bayless and Stephen A. And First Take's been one of my favorite shows for a long time. And I've always been interested in Stephen A. About his life, and where he came from. And, you've heard him touch on it over the years on First Take or in other interviews or on his podcast. But to hear it come from him in a book form, it just felt more personal. In this book, he goes over his early childhood to college to his early career to present day right now. And, he goes into his personal life talking about, his upbringing, the relationship with his parents and his siblings, the relationship with his daughters, just a lot of deeply personal stuff that you don't get to hear him talk about often, which made me very excited to read this project. The book starts off kind of on a depressing note. The prologue, it covers his mother's death, which, I remember when it happened, he was on First Take for a while, and, everyone knew about it. And I remember being on Twitter that day and seeing all the support he was getting. And that's kind of, he plays a good and bad guy, depending on which opinion he's swaying on. But either way, if you agree with him or you don't agree with him, I feel like a lot of people like Stephen A. As do I. I'm a Cowboys fan, but I still love Stephen A. no matter how much he dogs on us. And like I said, the book starts off on a very depressing note, covering the death of his mother. And I'm not going to go into word by word of stuff that happened in the book because I want y'all to read the book. I'll go ahead and get out the way early. This will probably make people click off the video, but I do highly recommend the book. I recommend buying it. I recommend buying the audiobook. He narrates the audiobook himself. So if you're someone who doesn't like to read, but you like listening to podcasts or just listening, it is available on audiobook and he narrates it himself, which I think is very awesome. Um, I like it when the author narrates their own books, like I like Joe Buck's book a lot because he narrated himself. I don't have a physical copy of his book like I do this one, but I've listened to Joe Buck's audiobook of the Lucky Bastard book, which is another one I highly recommend if y'all want to check it out. But like Al Michaels' book, he only narrates like two chapters out of it, I think, and then the rest is some other guy narrating it. And I liked Al Michaels' book, but I think I would have liked it a lot more if he narrated it. But this one I actually wanted to read. The other two, which I know I'm getting off track, I apologize. The other two, I bought the audiobooks because I listened to them while I worked. So the first couple chapters talk about Stephen A's early childhood, talks about the relationship with his mom and his siblings, and the tumultuous relationship he had with his father. I've never heard Stephen A. talk about his dad before, and I can see why now because his dad sounded like a prick. You know, Stephen A's dad cheated on Stephen's mom, had a whole nother family that he was keeping secret from Stephen A's family, and was actually taking money from Stephen A's family to support the other family. And there was one instance actually where the home insurance money, he stole that to pay the other family to support them and almost caused Stephen A's family to lose their home. And that's when Stephen A's mom finally found out that his dad was having an affair. And there's other times where Stephen A's dad just tells Stephen's mom that the boy's dumb, he's just not that smart because Stephen A got held back twice, and he was in the fourth grade and reading at a first grade reading level. So, his dad just sounded like a horrible person. And whereas you read this book and you find out how much Stephen A's mom dying affected him, his dad dying didn't affect him at all. It made him sad, but it didn't make him depressed. Stephen A has dealt with a lot of loss and a lot of adversity, and that's covered a lot in the early chapters. While he's at college, he gets a basketball scholarship at Winston-Salem State University, and then he blows out his knee, and had to move back to New York to rehab it. After finally getting to leave home, he had to go back home because his knee blew out, and his basketball career was pretty much done. And then uh, I believe it's the next chapter. I should have probably marked it down. His brother Basil dies in a car crash, and I've heard him talk about this before. If y'all ever watched that episode of First Take after Dak Prescott did his interview talking about the depression that he had after his brother committed suicide, I remember Stephen A. talking about his brother, him and Max both talking about their brothers that had passed away. So I already knew that Stephen A.'s brother had passed, and he tells a story in this book that he told on the show about in High Point, Carolina, North Carolina, how he just sped like crazy and ran like 6 or 7 red lights, and how he just wanted to die, and how he was just severely depressed after his brother died. And I mean, that's very, very, very tragic and very relatable. And, that was a really tough chapter to read because, yeah, it was just really sad. And I mean, there's just a lot of sad parts in this book, so be prepared for that if you choose to read it. He does talk about how his brother did tell him one day, though, that he would wind up at ESPN. And man, does he look like a genius. And I'm jumping all over the place right now. But I want to go back to the point I was making earlier about Al Michaels' book. Stephen A. and Al Michaels have a lot of similarities. Um, Al Michaels kind of got his start covering high school sports, like called games and all that. And Stephen A., whenever he started like getting to cover sports and all that, he started out covering high school football and college sports and amateur sports and all that. And when I was reading that, I'm like, man, that's very similar to Al Michaels. And I just found that very interesting. They're in two different, um, I don't know the word to describe it, but Stephen A. is a sports talk show host and Al Michaels is a commentator, But I found it very interesting how, they both got their starts covering amateur sports, and then how they both looked up to Howard Cosell. That's where Al Michaels learned a lot of stuff from, was from Howard Cosell, and that was Stephen A.'s idol pretty much when he was growing up. Jumping forward a little bit, after Stephen A. cuts his teeth for a while at CNN SI and the Philadelphia Inquirer, he finally makes it to ESPN where he has success on NBA Shoot Around, which eventually leads to getting his own show, quite frankly. With hearing him talk about it in this book, it sounds very, very interesting. I was probably like 5 or 6 whenever the show aired, so I'd never seen an episode of it. But now I really, really want to see it. I think nowadays it would be very successful on ESPN. It'd be definitely different than any other program that they have, a late night sports talk show. I think, and that's one thing Stephen A. covers in this book, that he doesn't like getting up early in the morning. He's more of a night owl, which I find very funny with how early in the morning First Take is on, and how early I imagine he has to get up to be in production meetings and get the topics ready for the day. Whenever he mentioned that, I found that very, very funny because I'm like, dude, I would think the opposite. I would think you were not a night owl. I would definitely think you were a morning person. I don't see how you could do First Take and not be a morning person. Um, but when he has that show, quite frankly, that's when he really starts making money. I think he said he got a 3 year, $1.2 million deal, and how he went and told his mom that she never has to work again, that he's making the money and he's going to be the one to provide for her, and how he pays off the mortgage and he sends her on any cruise she wants. And I've heard him tell these stories on his podcast before, but it was definitely nice to hear it again because it's definitely heartwarming. um, I think that's something every son dreams that they can do for their mom, if they have a good relationship with their mother. I mean, hell, I hope one day I can make enough money to send my mom wherever she wants or get her whatever she wants, and definitely hearing how Stephen A was able to do that definitely warmed my heart a bit. Chapter 9 and 10 cover his departure from ESPN. His contract expired, but he was really fired. They tried their best to just keep him off TV. They canceled, quite frankly. Um, it pretty much sounds like whenever John Skipper took over ESPN, he was not a fan of Stephen A. And one thing Stephen A talks about in this book is how no one that leaves ESPN usually came back. Nowadays they would go to FS1. Back then that wasn't really there. So it was pretty much, okay, you're off ESPN, you're not in sports media anymore. And that can definitely be scary if there's no alternative. And Stephen A talks about how he was unemployed for a year and how eventually one of his buddies, Dave Roberts, kind of helped secure his return to ESPN. And, he was pretty much not allowed on television. He was just a radio personality. And then that's when chapter 12 covers his relationship with Skip Bayless and how their partnership on First Take kind of got started. They were on TV together before. They had done shows. Um, the earliest thing I think I've ever seen from them on YouTube is them actually reviewing The Dark Knight, which is a really funny clip if y'all want to look that up. I've heard both Skip and Stephen A. tell the story of how they shot a pilot for a show called Sports in Black and White, which pretty much would have been a PTI knockoff, and how they used to do a segment on Sports Center on Sundays called Old School and New School. So Stephen A. and Skip have had a long-standing partnership, which is covered heavily in this book. And that's one reason I think a lot of people are going to end up purchasing this book, is to hear about the relationship between Skip and Stephen A. And it's covered very well in this book. I've heard them both tell stories about each other on their podcast, the No Mercy podcast, and then the Skip Bayless show. I've heard both of them talk about each other on that show, on their shows, excuse me. But it's really covered extensively in this book, which I know is probably a reason why a lot of people bought this. So if that's one concern you had about this book, it's covered in here. And one thing he also covers in this book is him being a dad, which is the very uh, I don't know the way to put it. It's the part that's not the most heartwarming, but it's the part where you realize this is a real person. This is a guy with kids, that's trying the best he can. And part of the reason he works so hard is to provide a great life for them, which is it's what every father should do. But, there's plenty of parents out there that don't do anything for their kids. So to see someone like Stephen A. that works as hard as he does so he can provide a great future for his daughters, that is very awesome to see. I know there's probably a better word I can use than awesome, but it makes me very proud to be a fan of his, to hear about how hard he works and the reason why he works as hard as he does, and it definitely makes me view him in a different light, which I already know the dude worked hard, Like I said, he's on every ESPN show you can think of, but now you kind of know his motivations behind it. One interesting note in here for my wrestling fans that are on this channel, I don't know how many of y'all are going to end up watching this review, but Stephen A mentions about whenever he signed his contract extension with ESPN, how he had a new agent going into that deal with him, and that agent was current WWE CEO Nick Khan, which I knew Nick Khan was a sports agent. I just forget about it. I don't really think about his life before WWE, but I know he used to represent Ariel Helwani, and yeah, I guess he used to represent Stephen A. Smith, which I never knew about. So whenever I read that, it kind of was like, holy crap. Sometimes you read these names and you're like, well, that person's just a faceless figure behind the scenes. It's like, oh, I actually know who Nick Khan is, and that definitely made that chapter really interesting to me. One thing Stephen A. doesn't shy away from in this book is the controversies that he's had while being on First Take. He had that Ray Rice fiasco back in 2014, which heck makes me feel old hearing him talk about that, because I'm like, dang, that doesn't seem like that long ago. But yeah, back in 2014, and then he had that controversy with Steph Curry's wife. and then a few years ago, the Shohei Ohtani incident. So he doesn't shy away from the times he's put his foot in his mouth. Which I definitely like that he doesn't shy away from the times he screwed up. I highly recommend this book. As I said in the beginning, I'm going to wrap the review up right now because a lot of the stuff in the later part of this book is more modern day stuff that I think people already know about. He details his battle with COVID-19 and how he almost died, and he goes into way better detail than I can right now in this book. So I definitely recommend if y'all want to hear about his battle, definitely buy the book and read it for yourself. If I gave it a rating, I would probably go 8 out of 10. I think that's a fair rating. Very good book, not boring at all. There's some portions of biographies where you're like, I don't really care about this. And I mean, there was some of the college stuff that I paid attention to. I didn't think it was the most interesting part of the book. I found the stuff about his childhood and then stuff about him being a dad the most interesting. But the stuff about college is a little interesting, but that's kind of like the only kind of period of the book. But highly recommend. Sub to the channel. I got the little annotation below me. I should hopefully have the GDS podcast launching soon with my buddies Adam, Drew, and Curtis. We're hopefully going to record that next Tuesday. It's going to be recorded on Zoom, so we'll see how that goes, because there's only a 40-minute time limit. So I'm going to have to splice the two clips together. But that should hopefully be coming next week. So y'all stay tuned for the debut episode. And then I'll probably have Royal Rumble predictions sometime next week. I go on vacation from work next week, so I'm going to try to make some videos. And then I'm going to Monday Night Raw, the show after the Royal Rumble. It's going to be in Tulsa at the BOK Center. So I'm going to record some entrances and have those up for you guys. And then I'm also going to try to make a little mini vlog like I did last time I went to Raw because that was a very successful video on my channel and I know people liked it. And I'm going to be sitting front row again, so I'm going to have a great view of the action. So stay tuned for that. Thank you for watching the review. Like the video, share it on Twitter. Who knows? Maybe we'll get Stephen A to comment on it. Have a great day, everybody. Thank you for listening.